they prepare students for life following graduation. And this does include disciplinary and technical skills. We do want engineers who know about gravity, who know the basic principles or the principles of engineering, so that if they're, for instance, building a bridge, the bridge doesn't fall down. But as well as that, we need them to have skills, attitudes and attributes for the world of the future, because the role of accountants may change, and we need to have students who can adapt to that role with the mind and not be stuck in the body of knowledge that they developed in their studies without being able to move from it. So it is important that we have both these aspects. And what we can say is that theory or conceptual knowledge is important, and it does need to be an important focus of teaching and learning in higher education. It's foundational to students' disciplinary study, and it prepares students technically for their professional lives on graduation. And a lot of work has been done on this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Meyer and Land, who wrote about threshold concepts. And they said that these studies, it's like opening up a new door for them, and what was previously an inaccessible way of thinking. Now these threshold concepts or theories and conceptual understandings can be challenging. They can be troublesome. And really, we expect higher education to be like that, because we want our students to develop. If it's just continuing on more of the same, we're not challenging them to develop and go to higher levels. But they do need to be, excuse me, sorry. They do need to understand these basic concepts, theories and conceptual understandings, and finally they are transformative. And they're important in curriculum design. Some examples are opportunity cost in economics, gravity in physics and engineering, depreciation in accounting, and so on. In terms of English literature, deconstruction for text analysis. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? So it's this core knowledge. And often, you know, our teachers can spend all of the time on the core knowledge. But the point is that best practice teaching and learning is more than students only gaining theoretical knowledge. Our learners need to be able to contextualise and produce data, to generate knowledge based on experiences and environment. We need to prepare, as the Ministry of Higher Education document Framing Malaysian Higher Education 4.0 says, we need to prepare graduates who are agile and adaptive to changing demands. So it's not just enough to be able to acquire information, they need to be able to do things with it. There was a recent article in University World News that commented on students and universities in Asia. It was written by Charoenwongsak from Thailand, and he commented that many university examinations in Asia still place a lot of emphasis on theoretically oriented responses. Now this is significant because we know that assessment does shape the way students go about their learning. There's been a lot of research to show us that. So if you are just assessing students on showing that they can understand theories and concepts, you're not encouraging them to be able to develop, to derive data, to apply, to look to new findings and things like that. And these were the comments of this writer in University World News. And he did point out, yes, of course, students do need to have this conceptual knowledge, these theoretical, this core knowledge for their disciplines. But in today's technological driven world, we need to have the practical in line with the theoretical. And this writer then went on to point out that there is a reciprocity here. If we're asking students to do more things with the theory and the concepts and the ideas from their disciplines, then actually they come to understand them much better. So we're serving two goals at the same time. Okay, so we need to think about preparing our students for the future. It's our responsibility, really. You know, the future can be the 3 or 4 years until students are out into the workforce on completion of their degrees and on with their lives, or it can be a larger future than that. But what we do know, and we heard about it yesterday with our speaker, Dr. Pradeep, that there are huge global changes, that it is Industrial Revolution 4.0. And of course, as Prof Bajunid pointed out, there have been other revolutions. But I'm sure that you would all agree that there are changes in automation that are occurring every day. How many of you go to the bank now to transfer money? No, you just do it online. How many of you have to open your garage door? Often you could just press a button and it's opened. You don't need to go to the person at the office at the train station to buy the ticket. And if you go to the supermarket, very often they have self-checkout, so you don't have people happening there. There are wonderful things happening in our world. And really, we shouldn't deny them. It's fabulous if you think of the medical advances that have taken place through the development of digitalisation and computers and so on. The operations that can take place through robots, which can be much more precise than through humans. Why would we not want this to progress? It really has enhanced the lives for individuals and for societies overall in many ways. But humans are still important, and this Ministry of Higher Education document points out that humans need to learn to work and exist in partnership with technology, that human cognition is powerful, and combined with technology, it is a global trend and can be even more powerful. It leads to big data via data integration and machine learning algorithms. So we could sum it up, and this is what Brynjolfsson and McAfee say in their book called The Second Machine Age. They point out that getting data is now easier than ever. We don't need to go to the libraries like we had to in the old days to find a particular journal, then to find the article, then to photocopy it. We can sit at our desks, and just with the pressing of buttons, we can have an article delivered on our screen within 3 or 5 minutes. So getting the data is easy, but the ability to interpret and use the data is important. And Brynjolfsson and McAfee point out that jobs of the future will be those for data scientists, mobile phone application writers, genetic counsellors, and so on. What are some further aspects of the world of Industrial Relations 4.0? Just to give you, look, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but just to bring it together in terms of the focus of my presentation today. The Ministry of Higher Education document points out that Malaysia is highly dependent on the capability of the populace to innovate, to apply advanced knowledge and technology, to come up with new processes, new products, new services for the socio-economic development of the country. And this is not so just in Malaysia. My country, Australia, has the same imperative, and probably Profs from New Zealand has the same imperative as well. Many countries around the world are looking for innovation to push their countries so that they can maintain their positions and advance. So there will be job displacement. We already know about that. We don't need so many cashiers in the supermarket to take our money from us if we're doing it ourselves, and to pack our groceries in the bags. We don't need the bank teller, and we know that driverless cars and trucks are coming soon. So we won't need truck drivers for those. Many jobs are being displaced. And what is happening, according to Palmer in The Economist at the beginning of 2017, is that jobs that are made up of routine tasks that can easily be automated or done offshore, they're in decline. And perhaps you've even noticed that in Malaysia, that many of the manufacturing jobs that were about processes are now automated, or maybe even done offshore. And so those workers are not needed. So, but the number of jobs requiring greater cognitive skill has been growing. There is the need for high-skilled talents rather than those previously for the manufacturing industry. And again, some of the new jobs that are emerging, you can read those at the bottom of the slide. Also connected to this is the knowledge society. We heard about this yesterday. We are living in the knowledge society where rapid technological development means that we can immediately share and learn from each other internationally. I'm sure many of you do Skype meetings where you're interacting perhaps with somebody in Finland or wherever that you're doing your joint research together, and you can do that instantaneously. So we have complex interactions and we have speeding up of worldwide connectedness. Now, out of this, we have new situations arising from this rapid change. And there are new solutions that are required for the problems and the issues that emerge, because these are new. We haven't seen them previously. But we shouldn't be too disconcerted. We shouldn't be too concerned about this in terms of our graduates. Brynjolfsson and McAfee point out in their book that, sure, if in the history of the world before we've had to deal with the issue of obesity and of climate change, the old solutions that we had are no longer relevant. We need to have people who are capable of creative thinking to think of new ways of solving these problems. And if we think just last week or this week of the students stuck in the cave in Thailand, this was a new situation. How are we going to get them out? So it required new solutions and bringing together thought from a range of backgrounds in order to be able to get the boys out safely. And thankfully, they have been. Okay, so this is the world that we're actually in now, and it will be deepened. It will continue to develop. It's the world of automation, digitalisation, and so on, where the skills that are required are the higher level cognitive skills, while students still need to understand the theories and the concepts related to their disciplines and need to be able to work with them. They also need other skills as in addition to those. So what are the implications of this for teaching and learning? Well, you can guess. And perhaps you've even been thinking about this yourself. There is change required in the design of curriculum, in the delivery, and the assessment. So we need our graduates to be adaptive to changing demands. So we need our students to be lifelong learners and knowledge seekers. And this actually comes from the Ministry of Higher Education document that I showed you previously. So what does it mean in terms of teaching and learning approaches? So what we had, maybe still persisting to some degree today, but certainly was what we had in the past, was teacher-centred, where the students were receptacles for the knowledge. And what they were required to do in their assessment was to regurgitate and respond to the knowledge. Can you all relate to that? Perhaps that's the education that you experienced yourself. And there is a need for some of that, as we've said before, in higher education teaching and learning, but we must move to dynamic teaching approaches where students explore the real-world problems, where they collaborate on social learning platforms. It's not just learning from the textbook. And then we need to go to the next stage, doesn't finish there, diversification of students' roles. So the students actually become the ones who gather the knowledge, the content. They are the producers. They're the ones that make the connections. So what it leads to is the development of students with higher order thinking skills, where learners actively contextualise and produce data rather than only acquiring it. And general knowledge is based on personal experiences and environmental participation. The web is the global curriculum and educators are resource guides. I don't think we're there yet, but that is what is envisioned for the future. So, what is required for the future is a focus on 21st century skills. They've been put forward by a number of researchers in the field. Cited here, IConFEd, and also another, Sharma, who wrote recently in University World News. They've been summed up as students need critical thinking and problem solving. We're probably aware of that. But they also need to have the ability to be creative, to think creatively, because that underpins innovation. Students' creativity. They must be able to think unconventionally. I think this is a bit dramatic here when it says that they need to question the herd and imagine new and produce astonishing work. Maybe that's a bit extreme, but I think you do get the idea. And they need to imagine the unimaginable. Was it Prof Bajunit who gave us the example yesterday from Get Smart, where Maxwell Smart had the shoe phone, and we all thought that was hilariously funny in the 1970s and 80s. And here we are, all sitting here today with our mobile phones. So they have to imagine the unimaginable to hone their creativity skills. Now, just to make it more precise what we're talking about, creative thinking differs from reproductive recycling learning, which is remembering. I'm sure you all know Bloom's hierarchy of learning. So students do need to do some of that, but on its own it's not enough. They need to understand, they need to explain what a particular principle, concept, theory, idea is, but on its own, even with remembering, it's not enough. And neither is the ability just to apply, to use a procedure in a given situation enough, or analysing, evaluating, which means identifying parts and their interaction, judging based on criteria and standards. All of those things are important. Our students need to be able to do them, but we need to go further than that. And this has been expressed in the Ministry of Higher Education Education Blueprint 2015 to 2025. For the student outcomes, they state clearly that students need to be able to appreciate diverse views, think critical and be innovative, have problem solving, entrepreneurial, to be inquisitive and innovative, to be able to create and connect knowledge, to be job creators and balanced citizens. So there it is. That's what you should be aiming for with your learning outcomes. But leads us to the question of what is creative thinking? You're probably all saying, oh, what is it? Excuse me again. It's only when you start talking that you start coughing, so please forgive me. So what is creative thinking? Let's look at it with some initial comments. And just as you're thinking, oh, look, I can't define it, this is what the experts as well say, it is hard to define. It is elusive and it has complex characteristics. We know if something is creative, but how do we define what it is? And we also need to remember, sometimes we think being creative is only for very special, talented people. But creativity is not new. It's been part of the evolution of humankind throughout time. And it's been necessary for the advancement and progress of humankind. For instance, I should put here cave people. So I'm sorry for that. It should have been cave people. Were creative in developing fire. And we just take it for granted now. But they were. And there's a wonderful book called Sapiens written by Harari. It's a fairly recent book. And he pointed out that what differentiated Homo sapiens from other species such as Neanderthals was that the sapiens had the ability to imagine, whereas the Neanderthals didn't, and that they could cooperate and work together. So it is here, it's part of us all. And it's the hallmark of a modern society which is going forward, rather than just repeating the same thing over and over. If we were just to repeat the same thing over and over, we wouldn't even have penicillin, would we? And we'd have people going to bed with the flu and perhaps dying rather than being cured of it. And what we do know is that education has a key role in preparing graduates to go forth and shape society, because the capacity for creativity can be developed in individuals. It's not just the great painters like Rembrandt and Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and Mozart and Beethoven. Everybody has the capacity to be creative. So let's look further at the vague and elusive nature of creativity. Steve Jobs, who was highly creative, as you know, saw it as making connections. Craft sees it as the ability to see possibilities not noticed by others. It has novelty, but most importantly, innovation and creative thinking must be useful. It's not innovative if it's not useful. Now, because it is unconventional thinking, it goes against the grain of what people think. It does require high motivation and persistence, because you're going against the herd. And it's based on vague and ill-defined problems requiring formulation, like the boys in the cave. How do we get them out? It's vague. We just want them out. But how are we going to do it? So just to look a little bit more specifically at what creative thinking is, we know it's thinking differently. And I've highlighted one here because I want to come back to that on the next slide. You know, sometimes we think being creative is like being Einstein, coming up with this wonderful theory. But it's not. Often it is combining existing ideas in original ways. It has convergent as well as divergent thinking, and as we know, it's combined with being able to say, well, these are the benefits of this, these are the disadvantages, critical thinking, comparing, contrasting, and so on. And you can read the other points here. So just to give you a fuller picture of what we're talking about when we mean creative thinking, or what I mean when I'm talking about creative thinking. Are you with me? Okay, is it relevant? Are you being naughty? No? Good. Okay, so I wanted to come back to that notion of recombinant innovation, combining existing ideas. And this is the wonderful book that I bought and read, recommended by my Vice-Chancellor at Sunway University, Prof Wilkinson, Brynjolfsson and McAvee, The Second Machine Age. It's a wonderful book. And they talked about creativity being combining things, recombining things that already exist. And they gave the example of a 1993 Nobel Prize winner in biochemistry. Forgotten the name, I think it was Kessel or something like that. And when he was asked, how did you come up with this, new idea that got you the Nobel Prize? He said, well, I just saw what was already there and happening, and probably a very humble person, and I just combined them together in a new way. So I think if we remember that, it makes creative thinking more manageable for us, not so scary. And we must remember, as Brynjolfsson and McAfee point out to us, that in ideas, humans have huge advantages over machines. So it means for a scientist, they can come up with new ideas. For a chef, it may be a new dish on the menu. Steve Jobs, he was creative because he responded to the question of what sort of computer do people want and came up with the laptop. So we need to remember that creative activities are supported and accelerated by computers, but not driven by them. Brynjolfsson and McAfee go further, and they say that computers equal, if we have an equation for all of you mathematicians, machines generating answers, not posing interesting questions, which is a uniquely human function. Computers can only do this within their programming frame. And McAfee and Brynjolfsson give some framework for creative thinking for education. They say you need to develop these areas: ideation, large frame pattern recognition, and complex communication. Ideation is just coming up with ideas, saying, what if we took this out, what would happen? Just asking questions. Large frame pattern recognition is bringing together data and information from a range of sources and being able to see patterns in it. And complex communication is about bringing in information from various data sources and being able to communicate that. And they say that what is ideal for developing these skills is self-organising learning environments. So if you have learning environments where people self-organise them, put them together themselves, that they are ideal for developing these types of creative thinking skills, because motivated students plus modern technologies are a formidable combination. Am I okay for time? Okay, so creativity is the heart of problem solving. Moving on a bit. So you're probably thinking, well, I've got a bit of an idea of creative thinking. I've had a consolidated view of the world of the future with automation and so on. I know that my educational programs have to be relevant for students, but how do I go about developing the capacity for creative thinking in my teaching and learning role in higher education? I did some research about 4 or 5 years ago with Mahendrahan Nair, the Deputy President of Monash University, Malaysia, and Shanta Vitalingam from the Faculty of Business. She's an econometrician, a statistics person, so it was fabulous to have her on the team. And what we looked at innovation, countries that are innovative, and then we looked at the quality of their education systems. You know, what degree of quality were their education systems? And from our analysis, we came up with 3 small countries that were very high in innovative output. And when we looked at what they did in their higher education or in their education systems, this is what we found. In Switzerland, for instance, we found that the students have diversity of choice, where they have state-of-the-art learning environments. The curricula is research-led. Students are solving problems. The teachers are mentioning research and the different perspectives on knowledge that can arise from the different pieces of research that they cited. And they gave their students exposure to international knowledge networks where they can share their knowledge but also learn from other people. In terms of Finland, I think we might all be familiar with the public support for quality research and development, the commitment the country has to teachers and education, and that also what we found was that the university teachers have training in research, cooperative and problem solving. In terms of Singapore, practical integration and multidiscipline approaches, creativity encouraged in undergraduates, and in the curriculum a cross-disciplinary approach is taken with active collaboration and joint degrees with other research centres. So there's much more reaching out and certainly much more than learning from the textbook. From our research, we came up with what we saw as some keys for quality higher education which underpin creative thinking and the ability to innovate. Active and applied learning, knowledge transfer. The next one and the final one are interesting for you. Incentives for staff to foster creative learning. Very hard to do it in a vacuum, but if the management gives incentives for it to staff, where they are encouraged, supported and rewarded, it's more likely that they will work that way in their students. And just to mention again, the education is beyond the textbook, out of the classroom. We know that creative thinking is fueled by collaboration and cooperation, especially if you have diverse groups that the students are working in. So they are confronted with different perspectives from people who come from different countries and backgrounds. Active and applied learning with international links. Education, as we've said before, you've heard me say the last one previously. So what can you do? You can give your students open-ended situations in their learning. You can accept the need for questioning and encouragement of critical thinking. At first, though, you may need to teach your students about this, that, you know, critical thinking is not a question of being rude and offensive. So you need to teach them what is appropriate there. Teamwork, give them teamwork and opportunities to interact with people and knowledge from different settings. Also if people make errors, well, we don't punish them and tell them they're bad and give them 0 so they hate university and they want to leave. We try to learn from the errors. I think that this, which is put forward by some writers about fostering creativity in engineering, gives us an understanding of what we can do. Engineering is very creative, as you know, it has to be. Like the engineers who worked with the medical doctors in the cave situation in Thailand to get the students out. So it's about keeping an open mind. So first of all, you have to open your students' minds so that they can tolerate ambiguity and search for answers and search for multiple answers. Finished? 3? I'll just very quickly, won't do that one. Okay, you probably do many of these things already in your class, part of them. You do research-led teaching, where you teach your students come to understand that knowledge is not fixed. It's not just the 4 principles of marketing in their textbook, that evolves as new findings are put forward, and there is generally no right or wrong answer. It's what is the best one. If you internationalise your curriculum, if you bring in content from other countries for the principles and the concepts, you help your students to understand that there's not just one way of doing it. And if you have students working in diverse groups, once again they understand that different people have different perspectives. Interdisciplinary approaches are most important, where students integrate knowledge. So if you have them working on a project, Maybe you have engineers, accountants and social scientists working on a project. Together they can come up with a better solution than what the engineers could themselves. Assessment is very important. As we said, it shapes students the way they go about their learning. So it needs to be formative and summative. And I know it is complex and difficult, but our learning objectives need to be about, you know, can the student perceive different, understand different perspectives? Can they be creative? We need to include that in our learning outcomes. So for learning, peer learning, virtual, experienced, outside, student-directed learning, independent, using ICTs to access information. And of course it leads to changes in the way we need to organise our institutions. Arouse students' curiosity and imagination, ask questions, and so on. Encourage independence in learning, have role plays, debates, posters, games, and so on. Brainstorm ideas. Get them to have their brains working flexibly. What could we do here? Brainstorm them, write them down, link them together. Okay, this was the traditionally way we used space in higher education like we're doing today. Oh, not many students there, maybe they don't like it so much. This is what we can envisage happening, where we've got, you know, computers or computer spots for students to plug in their computers, big screens all around, students can work in group. And you may think this looks surrealistic, but it is happening. If you go to Monash University in Clayton in Australia and you look at their new teaching and learning building, wow, it's got things like this and better. And they're changing all of their learning spaces. Cooperative learning. We need to provide furniture that encourages students to get together and talk about their issues and problems and their studies and so on. Sitting up in the desks is probably not the best way to encourage that. Immersive teaching and learning experience. This actually came from a subject of tropical biology at Monash, Malaysia. The students went on site and look at them, learning and applying their knowledge. Diverse student groups, very important. Some practical approaches which I won't go into because I'm being very naughty and going right up to time. So thank you for your attention and I hope it's been useful. Would anybody like to ask a question?
Okay. Thank you, Professor Glenda, for a very interesting talk just now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes of question and answer questions. So please, yes, Prof.
Thank you, madam. Very good presentation, very impressive. I'm also a scientist, and I've been teaching for last 65 years in university. I just ask a simple question. I'm serious. There's the expression, que sera, future is not ours to see. Number one, with the future. All the old only people like prophets, they used to forecast. So it means people say, Einstein used to say that I never teach my pupils, I only provide the conditions in which they can learn. I found teaching is very interesting, especially primary school, secondary school. Unfortunately, I teach people at higher education, university, MSc, PhD. But then I feel that human nature, I'm a scientist, I study about brain structure. I find brain is so complicated. People have done heart replacement, lung replacement, but nobody has been able to do brain transplant. People, as you know, average person like you and I, we use about 9 or 10% of our brain. So there is so much to be explored. If you use this bit, you become Einstein or you become a Newton, everything. So what I'm asking that, in this day and age, how to mold young people, how to teach them. Do you think teachers are born? Teachers learn to be good teacher? And I find myself, I'm a scientist, I teach, but I don't think I'm a good teacher. I'm not a good teacher, but I have been doing for the last 65 years. So what I'm saying that the way you suggested, future, enhancement, it means we know that teacher needs something better. I'm an old scientist. I sometimes feel like I'm a fossilized dinosaur. New technology has gone so much that sometimes I feel that I'm a useless, I'm out-of-date person. Technology. I was just reading last month that McDonald's, now they have got a device where nobody touch any, everything mechanical. Bread comes in, this comes in, this comes in. So what I'm thinking about that in education, a stage might come when somebody like you can provide some background and people can translate into different languages, different culture, different. So what I feel that do we need human beings or machine? And machine has taken over and it is frightening. It is frightening. So what I'm saying that, what is future? Is it dim? Future is bright? People say, yesterday gone, today is ours. Future, nobody knows. So I'm asking a question, what we do in a country like Malaysia. Malaysia is a very complex country. In my university career, 50 years back, we had a lot of students from Malaysia. I found they were very bright, but they had a problem with the language, accent. I still speak with my Indian accent, which is a very sort of, okay, so I cut down. So, yeah.
Okay.
So
I think the Prof got the question.
what I'm saying that, could you
Yeah.
suggest what we do in Indonesia or in this country to make better teacher, better students?
Yes, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, so Prof, the main question is, what is going to be like in the future, Professor Glenda? What is going to be like in the future in the face of IR 4.0? How do we cope with the demand of the future, technology and so on and so forth?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting perspective on it all, and I hope that I've grasped it. How do we know what the future is, and how do we prepare for the future? I don't know if you've read that book by Brynjolfsson and McAfee, the one I showed to you, and it's very interesting. In it, it looks at many, many aspects of what is being put forward as the world of automation. And one point that they do make is that when we look to the future, when we have to a bit, don't we? We can't just pretend that tomorrow's not here. If we're going to go somewhere, we have to buy our train ticket. So we do need to project and strategise a bit ahead of time. But this book says that when people look to the future with computers and automation, the big fear is that computers will take over, that they will be superior to humans. And maybe they will. I think the word 2045 was given yesterday, the year 2045. Maybe they will be. But these authors also say that these predictions like that have a way of preparing people. So people start to think, oh, that could happen. So therefore we need to emphasise the human aspect, the humans working with computers. And in a way, it sort of prevents that worst scenario from occurring. That's just what these great writers said, and it made sense to me. So maybe that's one part of looking at it. You also spoke about how to mould teachers. Well, I think teachers need to be exposed to the big picture of the world. They need to be exposed to different teaching situations so that they don't just have one model in their mind. They've got a range of views, and from there they can develop their professionalism.
Thank you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess time is just not on our side this morning, so I guess we have to end the session. Before we end the session, I would like to once again thank Professor Glenda Crosling for her keynote address just now. There's so many ideas to drive home with. There's so many big ideas from her. So in facing the new future of our higher education around the world. So back to you, Mr. Eng. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Encik Muhammad Saad Abbas, for moderating the session, and to our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Glenda Crosling, Head of Center for Higher Education Research, Sunway University, Malaysia, for informative and an enlightening speech on change in teaching and learning approaches, among other things. Encik Muhammad Saad and Professor Glenda to remain on stage for a memento presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Dr. Nagalingam Karupiya, Director, International Languages Teacher Training Institute, to present the memento to Professor Glenda Crosling. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagalingam, for giving away the memento. And that's the end of our third keynote speaker for this morning. In a few minutes, the fourth keynote speaker will come on stage and present. Before we continue, I have couple of announcements to make. The first one is about the lunch coupon. Now, yesterday there was a bit of a rush at certain levels because a lot of the participants, they went to a particular dining area to eat, okay? So I would like you to actually check your coupon and to see which level you're supposed to be. There are 3 places actually. The first one is a lobby, which is downstairs. The second one is at level 2, the waka, okay? Level 2, that is, I think, color-coded pink. There's another one at level 7 at the atrium, which is color-coded purple, okay? So please check your coupon color and also check the venue of your dining area so that there won't be a rush on one particular area and the rest will be empty. My second announcement is also on food, yeah? So the tea break this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. will be at the foyer at this level, just outside this conference, this ballroom, okay? Unlike yesterday, where you had your tea breaks in front of the conference rooms, okay? So for today, at 3:30, all the tea breaks will be up here. So everybody will have to come here to have your tea break. The third announcement is on lost and found. Now yesterday, when we rearranged this ballroom, for the gala night, there were some bags, some conference bags left here. So they are now at the Secretariat. So if you have lost your, couldn't find your conference bag, just go to the Secretariat and they are there. Okay? And that's the announcement that I have for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed with our fourth keynote speech. So without further ado, please welcome on stage Associate Professor Jonathan Newton of School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, accompanied by the moderator of this session, Dr. Kwah Seok Hoon, Senior Lecturer of Institute of Teacher Education, Tuanku Bahnu Campus, for our fourth keynote speech this morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And as you know, I'm here to introduce Jonathan Newton. I won't take very long because he's also told me to be brief. Right. As we know, Associate Professor Jonathan Newton is with the university, is with Victoria University of Wellington, and he has been in the language teaching business and in teacher education for more than 30 years. So he's got a wide experience engaging with teachers, especially in Asia. And he's now actually very actively involved also in conferences and is in demand internationally from this conference. His next conference is actually in August in Kuala Lumpur, and he's already been booked for the next conference, another ELT conference in Penang again in April 2019. So now, in terms of his books and publication, I won't say much. He would speak for himself, but I would actually just highlight his latest publications. This is his latest publication, fresh from the press, 2018. It's called, he's co-authored this book, and it's called Teaching English to Second Language Learners in Academic Context, Reading, Writing, Listening, and Speaking. And he's got two other books under preparation for publication, due to be out late 2018, called Culture in the Asian EFL Classroom and Using Tasks in Language Teaching. Right, I hope that's brief enough and good enough for everyone. So I won't take any more of his time. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jonathan Newton.
Thank you, Denise, and good morning. There was some interesting research done at MIT in Harvard on brain activity during lectures. You know what they found? It was non-existent. People's brain activity was more active when they were sleeping than when they were listening to lectures. So, before I start, could I ask you to do me a favor? Could you stand up, turn around, and get some blood flowing into your brains? Thank you. Stand up and just... Yeah, you can do some... Jiggle around if you want to. Okay. All right, well, thank you. You can stay standing up, or you can sit down, or you can lie on the floor. You can do whatever you want now. We're going to have a creative session. First of all, can I just thank IPG, Bayview, and IPK for the invitation to speak at this conference. It's a real privilege to be here. I enjoyed going to many sessions yesterday, and I apologize. I always have questions when I go to your sessions or comments. So I hope they've been useful. Sometimes I speak too much. You might notice that this morning. I know you'll all be looking forward to morning tea. I've got a lot to say. So stay concentrated because morning tea is coming up, but you do have to just stay with me for 45 minutes, all right? I'm going to take you on a journey to Vietnam. So we're going to go to Vietnam, we're going to come back, and then we're going to go back to Vietnam. First time, we're going to go into a secondary classroom in Vietnam, then we're going to come back and do some thinking, and then we're going to go back into Vietnam and look at a tertiary classroom. I was going to show you some case studies from Malaysia and China, but I've run out of time for those. I had to cut back my content. So I will be talking about a China case study in a small presentation I'll be doing at 11-something or rather, 11:20 in the program. All right, where is the teacher in learner-centered education, raising the bar and rethinking roles? I want to pick up some of the themes that Glenda's been talking about, creativity, and ask the question, well, what does this mean for us as teachers? What's our response to this 21st century learning, 21st century skills mandate? How do we put this into practice in our classrooms? And this is where the case studies come in handy, I think. But before I start, let me just tell you a little bit about me. My name's Jonathan Newton. I'm a New Zealander. I began my career in Ijiabaonian back in 1985 in China. And here's a picture of me. Whoop. In my first teaching post in Xi'an, in China. If you look carefully, you'll see that we're all drinking beer in the classroom. That's because it was the end of term celebration. So that's where I began my career. I live in Wellington, New Zealand. It's a rather small picture there. I was catching a cab last night and the driver said, "Where are you from?" "New Zealand." "Oh, that's in North America, right?" Seriously? I said, "No." Wellington, New Zealand. On a nice day, it looks like that. The secret is there are only 2 nice days in the year. Most of the time, the wind is blowing very strong. But on a nice day, Wellington's a lovely place. And you can see the university is great, Glenda. Only 2 or 3. Boy, come on and visit sometime. Come and say hello. Azati, of course. A little bit more about where I come from. Victoria University of Wellington housed the English Language Institute, which has a long history with this part of the world. And this is a picture of the 1961 graduation of teachers from Indonesia, the first cohort of teachers who came through our English language teaching program, what was called the DIP TESOL program at the time, DIP TESOL program at the time. 10 Indonesian teachers. And so we've been working with teacher education, with teachers from this region, since 1961. Well, that's a bit of background of who I am and where I come from. And now let me get to the nub of what we're going to talk about today. So here's an outline of what we're going to do. I'm going to set the scene, then we're off to Vietnam. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to look at some frameworks for raising the bar, 21st century skills, you're familiar with that, global mindset and habits of mind. And then we're going to go back to Vietnam, as I said, to a tertiary classroom and look at an example of a teacher's putting this into practice, and then a few final reflections. And I'll try and get you out the door by 10:30 if we're lucky. So let's start. Here's what Nelson Mandela said about education. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I wonder what changes you made to the world last week in your teaching. What changes did you make to the world last week, the week before, last year, last term? What did you do to change the world? Because I guess if you're not changing the world, you're probably not doing your job. Right? You know, one of the ways that I change the world, and I probably don't change it very well sometimes, with my PhD students who come mostly from Asia, they come and they ask me, what do I do now, sir? What's next? And I take them from that approach of, let me listen to the expert. I turn them, or I help them develop as the experts. So that over a year, 2 years, 3 years, I'm asking them to tell me what's important, what there is to know. So for me, one of my challenges is transforming my PhD students so they take on, through our learning conversations, so we're not expert and novice, but we're learning together, a sense of autonomy, a sense that I can take charge and discover knowledge. The interesting thing about this quote, it doesn't say whether we change the world for the better or for the worse. I wonder how many teachers are changing the world for the worse. I wonder how many teachers are producing robots. I wonder how many teachers are producing children who are anxious, who feel like they can't do it. Compared to the teachers who produce children and learners who come out of the classroom curious, excited, confident, growing, prepared to learn. And that's a key theme that I'm going to talk about today. Another interesting quote. Societal and technological change of a kind never before witnessed has been hurtling towards us, demanding that we radically rethink every aspect of our lives. Except, it seems, education reform. We're living in a world which is changing so fast. And you all know that. Probably faster than we realize. We're often on the cusp of new waves are breaking, new waves of technological advance and social transformation and globalization are just breaking on the beach of our lives, day by day, year by year. But it's interesting, isn't it, that education is one of the slowest institutions to change. Right? We're trying to move, but it seems that we're still kind of, one foot is stuck a long way back in the past, and the other foot is just inching forwards. We're familiar with 21st century skills. These are now sort of globally present in education mandates to develop education systems, to develop learners, communication, decision-making, creativity, critical thinking. I don't need to rehearse these ideas. Basic stuff which is filtered through all the curricula. But here's the problem. We have these 21st century aspirations, don't we? 21st century skills, great aspirations, but we have, in many cases, 19th century structures. Education hasn't changed for a couple of hundred years in really substantial ways. It's changed in some ways. And in the middle of this, we have the teacher caught between the mandate or the top-down imperative to be a 21st century teacher, but the system is still locked in the past. We still have testing regimes that lock us into the past. And teachers are caught between wanting to be creative, and Glenda, creativity is so important, but being pressured to teach to the exam, for example. And so you have these tensions, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with these tensions. Maybe you should hold the So that's the introduction. We won't achieve 21st century outcomes using 19th or 20th century models or methods. And according to Fullen and Langworthy, who've done some terrific work, an article that a statement paper, a report really, they put together called A Rich Seam, made this point. We need to move from delivery of instructional content to a pedagogy of coaching. A pedagogy of coaching. And we'll unpack what that means in this session. Now, you're not going to be able to see this. I hoped I would have a bigger screen up there, but it's a rather minuscule. I'll have to explain it to you briefly. The old pedagogy has content knowledge at the base. Everything is about content knowledge. The English teacher is an expert on grammar. They can use the language well. They're articulate. They can pronounce the language. And on top of that, they have some pedagogic capacity. So yes, they have a few, some good skills to do some basic work as a teacher. And on top of that, they have technology. And technology is like an add-on. It's like you show a video clip at the start of the class, right? Or your learners have to go and find something on Google. But it's an add-on. That's the 20th century. And Fullen and Langworthy argue that in the 21st century we need to have a model of a new pedagogy in which the whole thing is surrounded by technology, ubiquitous technology. Technology is everywhere. It infiltrates through teaching and learning, and this is going to happen whether we like it or not. And the teachers are discovering content knowledge together, and pedagogic capacity takes on much more importance. The expertise of teachers, not in terms of their content knowledge, but in terms of their skills in coaching, facilitating, fostering, giving feedback, managing group work. All of these skills become incredibly important. And why is that? Because our learners can go onto Google and find out just about anything we can teach them. They don't need the knowledge from us as much as they used to, but they do need us. They need us more than ever, but we just have to shift our role. I teach undergraduate programs and postgraduate and PhDs, and I'm increasingly finding with my undergraduate programs, I'm teaching same old stuff. My learners are sitting there with their laptops and their smartphones and things, and half the time they're actually somewhere else. Because I'm still trying to deliver content, and I'm aware that I have to shift because they've got access to the content. Folks, you could probably go up to your hotel room now and go onto Google and go to YouTube and go to TED Talks and find a couple of TED Talks which would tell you what I'm going to tell you today. You don't really need me, but hopefully I can package things in a way which is a bit creative and helps you see these things in a new way. So new pedagogies where pedagogic skill and learning partnerships in the classroom are important. That's the future. You asked about the future, sir? That's the future. And it's a future in which technology is ubiquitous. It's not on the margins. It's fundamental to everything we do. Okay, that's the background. Now let's go to Vietnam, get on the airplane, off we go. We're going into Hanoi. And the picture here is of Bao Trung. Bao Trung was one of my PhD students, did some fantastic research with me. I'm extraordinarily proud of her work. And she was interested in what are teachers doing in the classroom in a high school, and specifically what are they doing in the speaking classroom when there has to be speaking. She looked at 9 teachers, 45 lessons, lots of interviews, a huge amount of data. I'm going to summarize it very simply. How did the teachers implement the tasks? Okay, speaking lesson, 45, 50 minutes. Here's what happened. First of all, predictably, the teacher introduces the topic or the task. And they model the task. And they give the learners the language. They talk about the vocabulary and some structures, and they do a bit of modeling. So far, so good. That's what you do, right? Right? Then the learners worked in pairs, and they had to rehearse the task and sort of decide how to do it and work on the language. And then the teacher asked different pairs to stand up and present the task to the class. So step 3, public performance. And the learners loved this. They loved standing up and performing. Do your learners like standing up and performing? Do they get an opportunity? When they perform, are they criticized or are they embraced? Are they affirmed? What happens? Anyway, in the fourth stage, the teacher gave feedback on performance and language. So here's where the teacher really focused on language. Can you hear me okay at the back? I've talked about this before, so I won't go into any detail about it, and you can't see it anyway. But here's some students rehearsing the task. This really is much too small. And what you can't see there in red is where the learners are moving between English and Vietnamese to find the language they need in English to do the task, right? So they're moving between English and Vietnamese when they're rehearsing. So one of them says in Vietnamese, I don't know if any Vietnamese speakers here. Nu tôi to trang mot get ven. If I were a teacher, how do I say if I were a teacher? No Troy Don Tran, but however it is. And then the partner says, if I were a teacher. And then the student says, if I were a teacher, I would teach students many Gendolachi, kankolachi. What's the English word for kanchi? And the other learner says, knowledge. I want to, and then they go on, they're talking about language. And then they perform. And then the public performance, you can see that these students have worked on the language and they're doing this very smooth performance. High N, high H. What do you want to be? I want to be a teacher. Why? Because I like it. The class laughs, because that's a joke, right? Who wants to be a teacher? Why? Because I like it. Could you show me the reasons? Because if I were a teacher, I would teach my students many good knowledge, and I can confide in with my students, etc., etc. So you see language emerging from the creative opportunities. Language emerges, is constructed when learners are given opportunities to do things that are real with language. So that's all very well so far. So what have we got here? We've got communication. Just nod your head. Decision making? Yeah, in a small way, these learners have to make decisions. They are asked to talk about what do you want to be when you leave school? What's your career? Creativity? Sure. Critical thinking? Maybe. Maybe the teacher needs to develop that in the post-task phase. All right, so that's all very well. That's just background. That's what happens in the lesson. Now, here's the interesting thing. What did the students think about the lessons? They loved them. Great. What did they think about how the teacher introduced the lessons? And here's the interesting thing. So when the teacher introduces the lesson, they model the task, they give the vocabulary, the grammar, and here's some basic numbers. 36 out of 54 students who were interviewed preferred to do the task in their own way without the teacher's model, without so much language input. 36 of them didn't want the teacher spending 20 minutes talking about the task. And here's what one of the students says, and I'm sorry, this really is too small. In my opinion, there should not be a model of task performance because students tend to rely on it, thus affecting their ability to be creative in language use. This is a learner speaking. This is not a teacher. This is just a young high school learner in Vietnamese, translated. For the teacher's age, creativity is quite big. Sorry, for the teenager's age, creativity is quite big. The only problem we face is limited vocabulary to express all that we want to mean. We've got lots of things we want to say, we just haven't got the vocabulary. However, this learner says, however, this problem is not hard to solve. We can always ask peers and ask the teacher. Interesting? Interesting? Come on, sleepyheads. That's kind of interesting, isn't it, you know? you've got learners here who are talking about 21st century skills, and I guarantee they've never heard of 21st century skills or 21st century learning. But innately, this learner is expressing a desire to be creative. My point is that learners are on our side. Innately, instinctively, creativity, the need to, the desire to express meaning is natural if we provide the right conditions for it. But education systems squeeze that out. They squeeze it out. And by the time our learner's been in school for a few years, they're just trying to play the game. So what's going on here? Are the teacher and students on the same page? In some parts of the lesson, yes, but in a crucial way, no. Is the teacher doing anything wrong in terms of conventional pedagogy? No. This is exactly what I teach my pre-service teachers to do. You model the task, you talk about the language, and then you do the task performance. But interestingly, the learners felt that the teachers spent too much time doing this, and this restricted their creativity. So teachers, you have to find that balance, don't you, between supporting and scaffolding, but not suffocating. Right? Supporting, scaffolding, not suffocating. So what are the problems here? What transformations are needed to address these problems? Well, I'll try and go through some answers to those questions in the rest of the talk. I want to go through three. Well, I've introduced the first one, 21st century skills. Two other basic paradigms that I think are incredibly valuable for teachers, whether you're teaching maths or science or English, geography, history, whatever it is. Growth mindset and habits of mind. So strategy number one for teachers who want to shift into a pedagogy of tutoring, a pedagogy of supportive learning partnerships, I think need to adopt a growth mindset. How many of you are familiar with the growth mindset literature? It's been around for a long time. Okay, there's a few hands. Yeah. You know, Carol Dweck did her work at Stanford on growth mindset in 1998, a long time ago, but at the moment it's starting to bubble up and really come to prominence. So if you're not familiar with growth mindset, please look into it. Go on and Google it. Carol Dweck's initial research in 1998 was very interesting. She got a group of learners, let's say that you're the learners, and she gave them all a problem-solving task, okay? So you guys over here, or one group and this group, you all had the same task, and you were all given 80% correct or an 80% mark on the task, regardless of how well you did, okay? This group over here, you were told, well done, you got 80%, you must be really intelligent. You must be really smart. Good job, right? This group over here, 80%. Good job. You worked hard. You chose the right strategies. Well done. That shows that you're really focused and working hard. Okay? What happened to the two groups? They were given more tasks to do. Any difference between the groups? This group over here, when they were given more tasks to do, they chose tasks that would make them look smart. They chose the easy tasks. This group over here chose the tasks that would challenge them and push them forwards. Which group enjoyed learning the most? This group. You guys are lucky. Which group persisted? Which group stayed on the task longest? This group. Which group did more future tasks? This group. Which group wanted to make comparisons with other learners? Which group wanted to compare their performance with other learners? That group over there. 80% of this group wanted to compare. Only 23% of this group wanted to compare. Right? Can you see the orientation that the teacher has put into the learners just by the way they give feedback? Which group lied the most about how many problems they'd solved? Which group didn't tell the truth about how many problems they'd solved? 38% of these learners exaggerated. 12% of these learners exaggerated. So you can see this is the fixed mindset research, and it's grown in all kinds of areas. My wife trains judges. She works with the judiciary in New Zealand, and they're working with growth mindset orientations with experienced senior high court judges. It pervades all the professions. The growth mindset essentially is a mindset which says, I can do better. You foster in your learners a sense that I can do better. You don't foster in your learners a sense that I'm good because I'm bright or I'm intelligent. And when you foster this, you get learners who see learning as the goal. They make an effort, they make more effort, and they spend more time on the task because they have a sense that they can do better. You know this guy? Nobody knows this guy? Andy Murray? I think Wimbledon champion last year, I think. Andy Murray took on a new coach a few years back, Ivan Lendl. And Ivan Lendl had been a Wimbledon champion himself. And he adopted a growth mindset philosophy around his coaching. And this saw a transformation of Andy Murray's game. And he subsequently won Wimbledon. And I think a couple of years ago was close, number 1 or number 2 in the world. So how do we cultivate a growth mindset? Well, we avoid praising intelligence. We give feedback that affirms planning and strategic effort. We use diverse teaching strategies. We use gamification elements such as effort points. I've got a Samsung. Any Samsung users here? My Samsung has got something called Bixby, which is the artificial intelligence. And every time I use Bixby, every time I ask my phone, send an email to my wife, or you know, I ask the phone to do something for me, the phone rewards me. It says, great, you've just earned 2 X points. The phone designers know that we are intrinsically motivated by these X points. People who design games know this, right? All your learners who do games, they get X points for whatever it is that, you know, for getting further and further into the game. And it motivates them. It becomes addictive. We can build that into our teaching. We need to talk to our learners about a growth mindset. This is no secret. This research is incredibly robust. It's not pop psychology. This is strong psychological research. We need to be talking to our learners about growth mindset. We need to be doing exploratory dialogic teaching in the class. This may mean shuttling between languages to get the thinking process going. But we need dialogic processes in the classroom where teachers and learners are having dialogic conversations in whole classes. And that takes a lot of skill. And there are some other things there. We need to change our language. One of the simplest things you can do is add the word yet to your vocabulary. I can't do this. You can't do it yet. I don't know how to solve this problem. You don't know how to solve this problem yet. You can't read that, so I'll skip over the cartoon. So how do we cultivate a growth mindset? Oh, I've just covered that. It seems to be here twice. We can also change our students' language as well. One strategy I've seen used is that teachers put on the wall of the classroom a set of statements that represent a fixed mindset and a set of statements that represent a growth mindset. So there are ways that we can quite tangibly, deliberately, specifically cultivate a fixed mindset and really transform the learner's sense of their capacity for learning and for growth. Okay, it's half time. It's a bit over half time. Well over half time. A quick break. I'm going to skip the break because, again, the slides is minuscule, so we'll just skip over that slide. But we will have a break, so I'm going to stop talking for about a minute. Turn to somebody beside you and say, what's one thing, or ask the person beside you, what's one thing that you've listened to so far that you think is kind of interesting? For you, what's a take-home thing? Can you just have that conversation, please? Let me stop talking. Okay? Thank you for those people who actually opened their mouths. I'm sure those people who didn't open their mouth were all thinking deeply, right? Deep thinking, I hope. The second strategy, and it's quite related, is this notion of habits of mind and qualities of mind, and building an orientation to teaching where we're fostering in ourselves and in our learners qualities of mind. I want to draw on a book which I've found very influential recently, a book called Education Forward, about the future of education, and it's focused on the United Kingdom. So it's interesting that we're perhaps going to take a quick journey into the United Kingdom. Some educationalists in the UK see education in that context in crisis. They see it as in crisis, governed by testing regimes, by accountability regimes, by disillusionment, by demotivation, a lot of teachers struggling with mental health issues, all kinds of real issues in the UK. And here's a quote from Price's book. Millions of parents see schools making their children brittle, conservative, and anxious in their attitudes to learning, and watch in dismay as their children's adventurous, questing spirit shrivels up and dies. Boy, is that depressing. Yeah? Oof. But that's the reality. A lot of parents are struggling. They're seeing their children, and perhaps you've experienced it yourself, struggling with these kind of anxieties around schooling. The converse from the same book, if society is to be effective and people are to be fulfilled, it's their spirit and their outlook on life that will be as vital as the knowledge and skills they acquire. Indeed, important knowledge and skills are more likely to develop when worth and spirit are secure. So qualities and habits of mind, what are they? What are some of the qualities of mind that we want to cultivate in our classrooms? I'm not going to tell you. You tell yourselves. Ask somebody next to you. Turn around and come up with one quality of mind. And I'm going to ask some people. So you can't escape. And you've got 30 seconds. It's not a hard question. Okay, I'm going to cheat. That's only 20 seconds, but that's enough. Put your hand up if you're having your birthday this week. You know the trick. Excellent, madam. Thank you. Can you tell me a quality of mind? You have to shout really loud. What's a quality of mind or a habit of mind that you would like to develop in your classroom? A habit of mind? No? Put your hand up if you're under 30. Awesome. Oh, you lucky person. Habit of mind? Risk-taking. Risk-taking is a habit of mind. Thank you very much. Only one person in the room who's under 30? Are we all so old? More opportunities? The teacher giving opportunities? Right, opportunities to be creative. Problem solving. Huh? Modeling the process, yep. What's the habit of mind? Flexibility? Just a very short one? Awesome. Unafraid to ask questions. Great. And I think another one is self-knowledge, which is very interesting. Fantastic. All right, so you're getting hot now. You're really waking up. It's great. Curiosity, grit. Again, research on grit. Interesting, the research coming out of, I think it was Harvard on grit. Yeah, humor. It's another one. There's so many. But, grit. the research showed that students who exhibited grit, determination, did better than students who scored higher in the IQ tests. Habit of mind made the difference. Independent-mindedness, empathy, collaborative orientation. I want to help you, you want to help me. This is what we should be developing in our classrooms. Positivity, resourcefulness, imagination, and there's lots more of them, thank you. Global-mindedness. I'm going to skip over that because time's running out. How do we develop these habits of mind? So, you know, humor, risk-taking, unafraid to ask questions. It's really hard to develop them if you've got a classroom with lines of desks and students sitting passively behind desks waiting for you to tell them what they need to learn. Ain't gonna happen, folks. Ain't gonna happen. Well, there are lots of simple ways, and we have to go really fast now because we really are getting close to morning tea. What's on the wall of your classroom? What's on the wall of your classroom influences habits of mind. How your classroom is laid out. The physical environment structures the mental environment. Well, how you group students, how you foster collaboration, the way you talk to students. Boy, the way we talk to students is so important for developing habits of mind. The kind of feedback you provide, feedback that affirms and is precise and encouraging. How you assess, how you manage behavior, how you behave, how you teach and what you teach. We are really going to have to speed through this. But, you know, I would encourage every teacher in this room to say, what are 3 dimensions or aspects of my teaching that I can work on tomorrow to foster stronger, richer habits of mind? And choose the habits you want to focus on. Is it humor? That's great. Let's work on ways to introduce humor into the classroom. Let's make a fool of ourselves sometimes. I'm now going to take you to the second case study and then we'll wrap up. So this is back to Vietnam. Jump on the plane. We're off to Can Tha. Who's been to Can Tha City on the Mekong Delta? Wonderful city. All right. Another one of my PhD students, she asks the question, she's a teacher at the university, she said, I'm reading all these documents about 21st century skills, we're looking at the Vietnamese 2020 plan for educational development, and there's all this reference to global mindedness and intercultural competence. But then I look at the curriculum and it's nowhere. There's a huge gap between the top-down mandate and actually the materials and the teaching and the syllabus and the curriculum. And so she then asked, well, what can we do to fix this? And her commitment was to find a way for teachers to introduce global mindedness without having to rewrite the textbook, but ways to supplement what they were doing. So it's realistic, it's feasible, it's ecologically viable. This is very frustrating having this small screen. Here's the closest she came to communication in the syllabus for non-majors at this Vietnamese university. I'll read it out for you. There's 4 pictures of 4 places, and you're going to listen to 4 conversations about people planning to have events. You've got to listen and match the place with the event. And then you've got to listen again and decide the time. And then you've got to listen again and decide whether the call was successful or not. And there's a little bit of a language focus about modality. Can, could, shall, should, will, might, must. You know, how to ask politely. That's it. That's the closest these learners get to communication. Now, it's interesting if we think about the 21st century skills for these learners in Vietnam. Communication, it's impoverished. It's mechanical. It's formulaic. Here's a definition from the OECD of the kind of communication skills we're developing. The ability to interact effectively in heterogeneous groups, to set goals and make autonomous, context dependent decisions. Well, you're not going to reach that goal. Sorry, folks, if you're using this kind of material. Decision making, 0. Creativity, 0. Critical thinking, 0. And yet the mandate is to develop 21st century skills. Tao adopted some principles from an article I wrote a couple of years ago. The principles to change the book: experiential learning, start with yourself. Learners construct knowledge and understanding. They compare, notice, reflect, decide. The teacher is a learning partner. And the learner's first language or mother tongue is used as a resource during the lesson, if needed. So here's the lesson plan. Crikey. Students were first of all asked to make hypotheses about cross-cultural differences in politeness, America versus Vietnam. What's your hypotheses? We've got any North Americans here? Okay, so one of the hypotheses the students made was, I think Americans are more straightforward than Vietnamese. That's their hypothesis. Then in small groups, they were given the 4 different scenarios for planning, and they had to develop a role play in Vietnamese and or English. Then they had to perform the role plays. And when they were doing it, they had to notice how each group managed politeness and directness. And then they go back to the textbook and listen to the textbook dialogues, and they compare their dialogues and their Vietnamese intuitions with the textbook. And they reflect on differences, and they go back to their initial hypothesis. And that initial hypothesis is the form of a stereotype. We all have stereotypes. But this is designed to get learners to subject their stereotypes to critical reflection. So what we have here is communication, decision-making, creativity, and critical thinking introduced into this lesson based on the textbook. This wasn't throwing out the textbook, it was using it, but it was using it creatively. So you notice the teachers have to be creative too. Here's what one of the teachers said about this lesson when she taught it. Reflecting and relating, these are the processes. I have to reflect, I have to relate, brings real life in your teaching. That's the part I'm really pleased with. I think the reasons why students can't speak fluently in real situation, because they've only learnt from the book. They don't bring real life to the classroom. This relatively simple change brought the students real life. It brought their own decision-making and creativity into the classroom. And the teachers then adopted this approach, and part of the research was, is this ecologically viable and sustainable? And we saw that over a period of weeks, the teachers were able to adopt this methodology. I'm finishing now, you'll be pleased to note. See the little picture of the battery there with 6%? That's me and you. So my final points. If you want to be a 21st century teacher, start with yourself. I think sometimes as teachers we look out at the classroom and think, how are we going to teach 21st century skills? But I would say to you, how do you model 21st century skills? How do you model habits of mind in your own life, in your professional identity? Teachers need to be learning partners. You need to find a way to change teaching from instruction to partnership. This is the new pedagogy. Get with the picture, because it's going to change around you whether you like it or not. Remember that picture of the ubiquitous technology? That ubiquitous technology puts the learners on the same level as you. Folks, they've got access to all your knowledge. So you better change the way you teach so you're working with them. The third point is that pervasive digital access is fundamental to the new pedagogy, so the point I've just made. Fundamental to what I'm talking about is a shift, I think, which we're about to see really opening up across the world. I think there are economies of scale. I think this is really ready to ratchet up. So in the interest of time, there are some other points I could make, but I'm just going to ask myself some questions so you don't have to. Okay? So the first question, Jonathan. We're too busy teaching English, maths, etc. How do we find time to teach qualities of mind? Good question, Jonathan. What's the answer? You have to shout.
When we are in the classroom, we can initiate different discussions, collaborative group discussions. So whatever the topic is, we can start it with brainstorming, asking questions and coming to our point. So we can produce critical thinking and curiosity about seeking them to find something new that has not been discussed before.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. That's a really nice answer. I think, thank you. Collaboration, you're getting learners to break into groups. Some work I did with some teachers with Pelter, we were talking about what do you do in the first 3 minutes of a class? You walk in, the students stand up, good morning, teacher. Sit down. Is the classroom clean? Good. Now, today we're going to look at adjectives. Boy, oh boy. What qualities of mind are you creating? First 3 minutes of the class. Who watched the World Cup last night? Hey, all right. Yeah. Who won? All right, okay. So you start with a conversation. You bring the world into the classroom. What's on the blackboard from the whiteboard? Sorry, I'm an old man. What's on the whiteboard from the previous class taught by the science teacher, and it's in BM? Huh. We got our English class, but there's some science stuff on the blackboard. Let's talk about it in English before we start the class. Let's make connections. Teachers are time poor. My point here is that this is not either or, it's both and. It's not either I'm going to teach habits of mind or I'm going to teach content. No. Habits of mind, growth mindset through everything. Second question, Jonathan. Okay, well, that's all very well. You've just wasted 45 minutes of our time. What's new here? What's new? Anything new for you? Oh, I don't know. I'm not feeling very confident here, folks. Well, actually, there's not a lot that's new here, but that's great. These ideas have been introduced and talked about by Vygotsky, by Piaget, by Dewey, by Brunner, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. John Dewey, if you read his work, it's extraordinarily insightful. You'd think he was writing for the 21st century 5 years ago, and yet, 120 years ago, whenever it was. So there's not a lot that's new here, but I think these ideas are coming together, I think for the first time, with a critical mass behind them, and I think there's a real opportunity, and I think they're starting to scale up really fast. I think the difference is that over time these ideas have been refined, they've been confirmed empirically through developments in the cognitive sciences, and I think the conditions, especially through pervasive digital access, the conditions now exist for these ideas to flourish. Okay, on that note, I'm going to finish, and there's my book. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm sorry to take your morning tea time by 4 minutes, but thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And I think you've noticed he's done something very different, right? His model, he's actually got to think very creatively about what we would ask him, or you would ask him. And he's actually robbed you of a Q&A session too, right? And I think he's actually effectively assessed what you have learned from him as well. So a teacher's shift in roles, our shifting of roles is what is anticipated from us, teachers. All right, I think we're running out of time and we should not take you from your tea break, so I'm going to pass this session back to our MC. One more note before I forget. Jonathan's session is not in the program book, but he does have a paper presentation at 11:40 today on exploding the 5 myths of task-based language learning, and Sri Neelam too at 11:40 today. It's on the notice board, right? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwah Siu Hoon, for moderating the session. And of course, to our honorable keynote speaker, Associate Professor Jonathan Newton, for another informative and beneficial sharing session just now. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Dr. Sazali Yusof, Director of Institute of Teacher Education, Tuanku Bainon campus, to present the memento to our honorable keynote speaker, Associate Professor Jonathan Newton. Thank you very much, Dr. Sazali Yusof, for giving away the memento. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have our tea break and we'll resume at 11 o'clock and continue with our parallel sessions. Before that, I have two announcements here. This is regarding the school visit, ladies and gentlemen. For our international participants who have actually registered for the school visit this afternoon, please be at the lobby at least at 1:50 p.m. because the bus will be leaving at 2 o'clock. Right? And don't forget to bring your confirmation voucher and please board according to the number of the bus in the voucher, right? The second one is our donation box for our Silver Jubilee Gallery is located at the registration counter just outside the ballroom, and feel free to do your donation at any time. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you so much.
Yeah.